Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Current Conservative for another episode. Today we have on Gentry Gevers.
There you go.
I really didn't want to screw that up. We're really excited to have you on. I just think we're going to have such an interesting conversation regarding a lot of topics that Allie and I are like, we refer to the experts on these. so, and I think it's going to be super fascinating because I feel like we're all people who really are strong on our values and the things that we discuss online and social media, etc. But how do we take that out of the internet world and transfer and carry it over to the real world? So without further ado, I'd love for you, Gentry, to introduce yourself and just tell us what you do.
Well, my name is Gentry Gevers, so you guys got it right. I guess you'd call me a social media influencer. That's not my full-time gig. I sell HVAC, right? So I
Nice.
work out of the joke I always say is I work from home, but just not my home because I'm going to customers' houses all the time. But very, very passionate about America. I love America and I love Jesus too. Um, and I think that freedom of speech is really, really critical and important, especially on social media, because all the attention's going there.
Mhm.
And so that's why I started my page, is to speak out and be a voice and, go first. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and I'm
Great.
from Washington State.
Yeah, so
Washington.
that's Washington. I mean, it's obviously super liberal there. How do you deal with that?
My gosh. Well, it's hard. It's really hard. I feel like there's a lot of growth though behind enemy lines.
Mhm.
There's no fault to people who are moving to Texas and in Florida and all those other states, because I feel like there's probably a lot of reasons, like job opportunities and having schools for their kids and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
um, I don't think that God has called us to move away from hard things. Like
Mm.
my thought process is like I'll probably always be in a blue state, um, just to be able to fight back. I don't want to get to heaven and meet like Paul or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego or Daniel. These guys that like got crucified and got thrown in the fiery pit and in a lion's den, and be like, hey, what'd you do while you were on earth? And be like, I moved to Texas. I moved to Tennessee, right? I moved to Idaho. So,
So
I,
real, yeah.
That's a
yeah,
really good point.
yeah.
Yeah. I love that. You said that you love the freedom of speech, and
Hmm.
I there's so many sayings by our founding fathers that I love that talk about, like, if a nation doesn't have that ability to,
Hmm.
allow the citizenry to speak what's on their mind and what's
Hmm.
important to them, and to be able to even like criticize the government,
Yeah.
then it's no serious country, and it's you don't have any other rights if you literally can't speak your mind.
Mm.
And so I am with you on that for sure. And then also, I'm from California. I'm fourth generation Californian. And so I feel you so much about, always being in a blue state, and just the battles that conservatives
Hmm.
in blue states have to face versus red state conservatives. I always say, like, a Tennessee conservative, any red state conservative is not the same as a blue state conservative.
Hold
And
the
that's
Hmm.
phone.
not like that's
Drop
not a
the
diss
mic,
or
Allie.
anything. Yeah, it's not a diss or anything. It's really just a matter of fact that, like, we just deal with a different battle. And also, I'm very worried for red state conservatives, when it comes to being complacent in their beliefs and thinking, oh, I'm in a red state. Oh, I moved to Texas. I moved to Florida. I'm fine. There's nothing to worry about. And I just want to be like, yo, there are
You're
Marxists and
wrong.
Yo.
communists
Yeah.
and around every corner coming at you. So
And
don't.
that's they want to go there even more because they know that I feel like the liberals are infiltrating those states like on the low because they know that's a breeding ground because conservative people are like, okay, cool. Well, now we're like in a sanctuary and we don't have to try that hard. But it's like the school boards here, because I'm in Florida, the school boards here, like they have books all over the place that are like, have pornography and all that horrible stuff in them. So it's just as bad here as it is anywhere else, in my personal opinion. And I just think
Yeah.
that It is true. I mean, you do have to work a little harder because you have people out in the open,
Hmm.
especially with California, like with the abortion laws, and like that was a big, not laws or lack thereof. That was a big thing for me too, because I growing up, I was never. I mean, it was one of those topics where I was like very wishy-washy. Like I couldn't bring my like I you know like I went to a
Hmm.
liberal university and I was just like, well, like I was like swayed by the emotion of being like, oh well, maybe and then finally I was like, wait, what am I saying? Like this should be really important to everybody. Like this is a human life. And that's one of the things where it finally hit me. Like I can't be supporting and paying tax dollars that are going to murder children. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
anyways,
Huge,
that's a
for
huge
sure.
one.
I love it. So
Light topics, Yeah.
yeah, just right into it. Okay, so there were some things that we wanted to discuss mainly
Yes.
today, right? And so do you want to take the floor with the first couple of points or but did you guys see I kind of made some waves today slash yesterday.
Oh, you
Um
make
I,
waves? Oh, great. We love
no,
waves.
no, I was just gonna bring up the teacher who's in Florida, speaking of like red state stuff, the teacher in Florida who showed her classroom like a pornographic, one of those gay books, and
Hmm.
the parents filed a police report against the teacher. Have you guys heard of this?
No.
I
The
just saw the
story?
headline.
Okay, yeah. I'm just like, whoa. I mean,
I
obviously
mean,
this
good
has
for
been
them.
going on for a while, but
Hmm.
she went on CNN
Oh,
yesterday, I
goodness.
think, and it was Caitlin Collins who hosted
Hmm.
the town hall. And
She still has a job?
she's, I know, for real.
Oh, they were like, "Yay, Caitlin, you
Yeah,
did it."
everyone loved it. But this teacher said that parental rights are gone when children are in the public school system. And so it's really been making waves, with that statement because I think Matt Walsh said it like very, very rarely do we hear that be said so plainly and accurately that
Hmm.
it's a true battle out there. What these people are doing. And also Matt Walsh had a great point of like, never in history has there been a time in public school system where straight teachers were trying to show and talk to kids about straight sex. And also these books are so inappropriate that it's uncomfortable for even adults to discuss it,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
between each other. And also Matt was saying it's so descriptive and again so inappropriate that he can't even talk about it on the show. And I'm just like, that's such a good point. Like
Good
it's just
point.
it's on a whole other level. So anyway,
Well,
yeah, go ahead. I'm having
You
no
issues.
see
worries.
Allie,
You're just like
like,
a
your videos just,
I'm having like angel vibes
having
over
the
here for
like,
people
the
watching this.
halo.
so
Yeah.
kids are so impressionable too, and that's kind of a throwaway
Mhm.
statement unless you like actually think about it, because they're discovering everything
Mhm.
like as they go, right? They don't
Yep.
Mhm.
necessarily have context to think about things. And so I mean, it's a perfect way to, like, if you want to indoctrinate people on a certain mindset, like, you go to schools, because
Mhm.
they're not necessarily taught how to think, right? And now they're
Mhm.
taught what to think, but now it's like really, really specific and targeted to this like
Yeah.
ideology that we know the long-term effects of it. I
Yeah.
mean, if it, even if you go and look back through history, right? The Roman Empire fell because they got too fat and happy, and like they were just sleeping around with anyone, and
Mhm.
the men got weak, and then the barbarians came in, and I mean, it like kids are so impressionable, like they just
Mhm.
take everything as gospel,
Yeah.
as truth, and
Yeah.
so
Little
I think
sponges.
that, I mean, it's hard to say this because I don't actually have kids, right? So, but I feel like parents need to take a deeper dive into what's being taught in
Mhm.
schools,
Mhm.
and take like a more serious view of it, because the public education system has produced, I mean, idiots for a
Oof.
long time, right? Like test
Truly.
scores are declining. Like ever since Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education and
Mhm.
God came out of schools, like test scores are down, teen pregnancies are up, suicides are up. It's a
Yeah.
little concerning that people aren't like private schooling or homeschooling more. So
Yeah,
that's my thought process on it.
and
Yeah.
like what you were saying, like with the Roman Empire, it's just a matter of like, yeah, parents taking a step further. We're all childless. Eventually, hopefully, we'll all become parents someday. But yeah, parents need to take that responsibility and really consider what their children are being exposed to in the school system. And like what you're saying, learn the history. There is so much history with governments coming after children, especially in the
Hmm.
communist, far left spectrum of politics. It's very extensive, and the underlying message that we're hearing excuse me, from the left is that the children are all of our children. And again, the left messaging, it sounds really
Hmm.
good, that's so sweet, oh, we should all care for the children. To an extent, that is true, because that there's that saying, it takes a village. But again, like, that village is your family, right? People that you
Hmm.
really trust. Um and so they're using that messaging of they're all of our children. And really what that message is they're pushing the message of collectivism. And what we need to push back with is individual freedom, individual responsibility, individual choice. And it really boils down to the abolishment of the family and private ownership. That is what they're after with
Hmm.
this message.
Hmm.
So
It's so sick too, because you say, oh, we need individualism, but meanwhile they're being taught to embrace their identity of like almost neutrality, like, oh, I can be whatever I want to be. So it's like they go so far in the schools where you think, okay, well, in some cities like Chicago, they're literally being taught nothing. Like, they can't read or write, they don't do math, their literacy rate is like 30% or something. I made that up, but it's probably near around there. But then in other places, there it goes one step further, like you guys are saying, to indoctrination, where they're literally being taught full blown like pornographic content. Which, it's like, even in sex ed, it's not like they were showing us pictures, they're like diagrams or whatever, but that's like, seventh grade, like high school. So it's just crazy, because I feel like they're just flooding them with all of this information so that they can make up their own identity. But meanwhile, it's stripping them of all of their own thoughts and their own critical thinking
mhm,
abilities to make them adopt whatever the agenda says to do.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think that because of, everything happens simultaneously, like the issues that we're having with our economy and the culture, and our society is crumbling. And so parents are more concerned with like, how am I going to pay my bills? I need to make sure I get groceries. I need to make sure I have enough gas in the car. Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, what about all these laws that are coming and the regulations? They don't have the time and the attention perhaps to go to the school and make sure that their kids are being taught, like, let
Mhm,
alone why, like, they think in their mind, well, why should I need to do that? Like, shouldn't they just be taught science and math and geography and history and all these things? But
Hmm.
they can't teach them history, because in order to, I feel like, learning history, which is like, something that Ali and I are doing a lot of our time, is when you learn history, you learn what happens in the Roman Empire, and you learn these critical thinking strategies that open your perspective to the way that the other worlds live, the way that other societies
mhm,
live, and what happened. And so you can create your own thoughts and opinions and perspectives on life. And that's not something that little kids can do, because they're just living day to day. They don't have that like depth perspective.
mhm,
Hmm.
It's very
100%.
sad, and I do think parents have the ultimate responsibility to do that,
Hmm.
which they've always have. Maybe it shouldn't necessarily be that way, one could think, but I do think that it's in parents' best interest to A, know what their kids are learning, and B, take an actual interest in what they're
Hmm.
learning. Because why would you not, and also, like, you should be impressioning the values that you have. I mean, that's what's like, parenting is everything, right? Allie knows a lot about child development, and I've learned a lot through her. And it's just
Mhm,
like, those formative years are just so important. You don't even think about it until you're an adult and you're like, what was it? What happened?
Right.
Kind of
Right.
crazy.
yeah.
So teachers, though, are some of the most important people to kids, right? Because
Yeah.
they're the built-in authority figure.
Right.
And
For
in
so many
some ways, I
years.
think that they're going very strategic with this kind of gender ideology, right? And in some ways, they're going full blown, like that story that you were telling earlier about the pornographic sex ed book. I saw this story on Instagram. It was a video. I can't remember who it was, but this daughter came back from public school and was like, "Hey, mom, I'm a lesbian." And the
Oh,
mom was like, instead of getting like really really upset, she asked, "Well, do you know what that means?" Which I thought was a really good question.
yeah.
And I don't know how old the daughter was, maybe like 5 to 10, right? And the mom explained what that meant, and the daughter got just like disgusted. She's like, "Oh my gosh, no, I'm not that. I'm not that." And so I think it's even those like little questions like that can help a lot. I think I saw
Mhm.
this other stat, and again, I don't have kids, so I don't know if this is true or not, but uh, parents only have about 35 minutes a day of quality time with their
Mm.
kids. Like outside
Oh,
of like
wow.
getting lunches ready and bathing and getting like only 35 minutes.
Wow.
And it's because like all this other stuff like energy prices, inflation,
Yeah,
stuff's getting harder.
exactly.
Both parents have to work.
Wow.
There's this like it's if you look at the big picture, it's just an obvious attack on family and family values.
100%.
Yeah.
And I read a book last year on marriage, and the Gottmans, they're kind
Hmm.
of like OG like psychologists.
They're in Seattle.
Um oh really? Oh nice. Well, they do tons of studies on couples, and they've been, doing marriage counseling for decades, but they said that the average couple spends less than 15 minutes with face-to-face conversation a day because of the busyness of life and
Wow.
children and cooking and chores and taking care of the house and all of that. And it's like, how are you expected to actually have a thriving marriage on 15 minutes of face to face, you know,
Interaction.
talking with no distractions a
Yeah.
day? And again, what you're saying, it's an attack on the family, because I think that when they realized, we can get women into the workforce, and that we have this other demographic paying taxes, um, then they can really sell that public school education. And then and now we see the left pushing free education for university and then preschool, which is straight out of the communist handbook, because they want to get to the children as young as possible to be able to indoctrinate them with these demonic ideas and beliefs. And so yeah, the family is
Oh,
absolutely under attack. And more specifically, I would say the American family is under attack. I
Hmm.
I'm sure that this stuff is happening in other countries in different forms, but the more I learn about history, and leftist regimes, I really realize like the uniqueness of the American Revolution. I'm not talking about the American Revolutionary War. I'm talking about what we're living through currently right now.
Hmm.
And it's just, again, it's just so relevant, and it's so unique to America, because we've never had like this indoctrination level from the left of like this LGBT and like ideology
Hmm.
coming so forcefully on a generation like this. And so
Hmm.
yeah, I have two nieces and a nephew, and I think about the world that they're going to be growing up in, and it energizes me to do what I do, because I want to preserve so much of what I had as a child. And so I want to have that. I want them to enjoy the same country that I was able to grow up in. And sadly, it seems like it slips away a little bit every
Hmm.
day,
yeah.
So, um,
Hmm.
The nuclear
yeah,
family is very unique to America. I mean, a lot, even in
yeah.
France, I'm half French, and a lot of families or a lot of couples there are not married. They have kids and they're not married at all. So
Mm,
it's
Crazy.
just not, they don't, family is definitely a big part of their culture, but it's, and tradition wise, but it's not, there's no like value to it. Like, it's not like,
mhm.
oh, we should get married. Like, it's not, it just, they don't have the same like sequence of events that happens that has to do with like
Hmm.
how the traditional family plays out and functions,
Yeah,
which I think is just, it is really interesting because a
yeah.
lot of European cultures too, like they put so much value on tradition, but I
Hmm.
Mhm.
think America is like typical nuclear family, which is why it's taken a long time for them to be able to destroy that, and I think they have partially succeeded, which is terrible.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but you brought up the LGBTQ thing, and I think it's a good transition to like the woke companies, because I think Gentry, you
Oh
made the
yeah.
video about that earlier, so I'd
Hmm.
love
Yeah.
to hear your take. And how you
Yeah.
suggest fighting
Tell
back.
us where all this wokeness is coming from.
So it's interesting because it's not money motivated, because there is a really good case study that if you go too woke and you're just all about the trans or all about LGBTQ, that you're going to lose a lot of customers. Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch is a fantastic example of that.
Yeah.
Um, but they're not necessarily stopping. Like, I'm seeing comments that Dylan Mulvaney, that trans thing, is like they're looking to like create a whole show around him.
Oh
And
Oh
my.
my
it's
goodness.
and so it's not money motivated, like, at all. And I don't know necessarily why.
Mhm.
um Ford just came out with it's a Raptor commercial, and it was like all the colors of the LGBTQ rainbow, and
Wow.
like maps and the trans. It was ridiculous.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
it's not money motivated, and I don't know why. I have a theory.
Mhm.
My theory is that they're trying to attack brands
Mhm.
that are part of the identity of America,
Mm.
right? So
Interesting. Yeah.
Bud Light, right? It may not be good or bad, but it just is part of the identity of America, right?
Right.
Football games,
Good old
cookouts, right?
American beer.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Our
uh,
staple.
yeah, it kind of is. I never was a Bud Light guy. I actually stopped drinking a year and a half ago. But um, it's like the blue collar America flyover states tradition, right?
Mhm.
Same with Fords, right? You can make an argument that it's actually Chevy, but I don't really
Chevy.
want to get into
I'm gonna
that.
say Chevy. That's funny.
But it's interesting because I posted it. I posted the commercial, and a whole bunch of comments were like, "I'm selling my Ford. I'm selling my Ford. I'm selling my Ford."
Wow.
And it was, I think I got like 150 comments, and like a lot of them were like, "Hey, I got a Ford for cheap." Like, and so it's sad
Wow.
Mhm.
because whether it's good or bad, it's kind of built into the identity of Americans. So the question that I posed on social media was, what company do you think they're going to go after next? I mean, Target,
Mhm.
yeah, they went full woke,
They've
and I
been.
think that they're going to see a lot of decline in sales. Um, but what other like identifying company of America are they going to attack next? And
Right.
it's
It
kind of
could be
interesting because
anything.
it what
I said it could be any
Yeah.
company really at this point.
It's
it
almost
could,
like roulette at this point. We're like, okay,
Yeah.
the next
yeah,
one
Who's
comes. We're like,
next?
everybody get on the bandwagon. Like,
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I
it's
saw
it's
this.
very sad.
Go ahead.
sorry.
No.
It's kind of going into this idea of stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism.
Mm.
So, which has been going on in Europe for some time. So, what shareholder capitalism is, when you buy a stock in a company, right, you get a voting right, right? And with stakeholder, right, so you can vote in the board, and there's a ton of votes, and with stakeholder capitalism,
Mhm.
right, which is what Vanguard and BlackRock are doing, they are appropriating a lot of votes because they're buying up huge amount of companies. And
Mm.
what they're doing is they're furthering their agenda, right, with all this
Mm.
ESG stuff, and kind of going through a back door, so they don't necessarily have to pass legislation. They just have to be able to manipulate the money and kind of hold the purse strings for a lot of these companies. And it's really interesting if you look back, I think 30 years in Europe, where this has been happening a lot. The average returns is about 8%, right? So it still works, but it's less. And if you look back 30 years on the U.S. Um, in the U.S. markets, with shareholder capitalism, it's
Mhm.
about 11%, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But a lot of people are investing in 401ks and Roth IRAs
Mhm.
and all this kind of stuff. And if you compound out and you subtract 3%, people aren't going to be able to retire. They're not really going to be able to retire right now.
Yeah.
And so they're just going
Yeah.
to have to keep working, keep being busy.
Yeah.
And they're going to, I mean, when we're busy, they win because they have an incredible amount of funding from Soros and Clintons and Gates and the Fed and like whatever conspiracy theory you want to go down.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just this whole mess. And there's a company called Strive Investments. Vivek, I don't know how to say his last name, but he's actually running for president. They're doing a
Yeah.
really, really good job of talking about this. And so
Okay.
that's kind of how I got turned on to the idea. So,
Yeah, I saw a reel about a week ago, and it was talking about how basically what you're saying with these stakeholder companies, Vanguard, BlackRock, etc.,
hmm
they have these stakes, and then with those votes, they're going by something similar to what ESG is, which I can't really remember what the S is. It
Social,
sustainability governance?
economic, social governance,
Okay, and then
I
there's
think.
something very similar for another type of company, whatever, I don't know how to classify or characterize whatever, but it's called CEI. All these like
yeah,
freaking
I've seen that.
Yeah.
alphabets. Yeah, and that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like there's basically this contract that these companies want, or the stakeholders want the companies to push for, and the CEI is what this is, and the contract basically states like they have to reach out to at least 3 different LGBT owned
Mm.
you know influencer
Causes?
other
Oh,
companies and stuff, and they have to basically work with other people that are going to push this agenda onto their consumers.
it's
And
like a
so I
point
think,
system.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to explain, but it's similar to what ESG is. And so that's very freaky to know
Yeah.
that
hmm
it's just being like pumped through the backside of capitalism,
hmm
essentially.
Literally,
And
literally.
excuse me, I don't think that, I mean, as a capitalist myself, I'm not a fan of crony capitalism, which what we're experiencing right now. But I I think that the conservative movement, like 10 years ago, we were just kind of catching on to like the idea of like a social credit score system, and like, oh, that can never happen because we have our constitution, or we would
hmm
have some sort of like justification why it could never happen. But I don't think that we ever saw it coming from the capitalist side. Does that make sense? Of like like companies pushing it on us rather than the government. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept to kind of like grapple with. It's
Well, they're
something that I've
working
just
together
been,
at this point because I feel like the government
yeah.
has infiltrated the companies. And Vivek Ramaswamy, he does a good video about this, and I think it was through Hillsdale, and it's actually, I think it's even like a couple years old, but it's like woke capitalism is destroying America. He also wrote a book about it, and so yeah,
Oh,
I think
woke
it's pretty
ink.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
and which I haven't read, but I really wanted to. And
Mm-hmm.
gosh, I think that. Do you think that there is something to be said about like because they have to know that doing these programs and pushing these agendas is going to make people upset. I mean, I don't know if they think that it could have such an impact where the price of their stock goes down, but we've seen that happen with Disney, with with different companies where this has happened, and then their stock tanks. And so is that like it could also be like a pump and dump, like it's just like they push down and then they can buy all of that like really low stock and then they accumulate more of it and then
Hmm.
have I don't know. That
Have
just
more
occurred to me just
control.
now and be able to have more control or make more money off of it because I think
Yeah.
what you guys are saying, I mean, I agree with everything and I feel like that goes back to the idea that it's not money motivated and like I totally agree with that because they don't care what we have. Like they know that we're not going to, like they know people like
Hmm.
us aren't going to go out and buy it or we're more inclined to boycott these
Yeah.
brands because of this because it's so important to us now because they're destroying our culture
Yeah.
and it's important to like practice what you preach, right? And put it out and it like I see you're wearing a public square shirt and it pushes people to start businesses and like go for brands that actually support our values because we have to be
Hmm.
reinvesting. It's consumer like capitalism is great, like we love it, but it's you have to be putting back into companies that actually support our values because that just keeps the stream going instead of destroying from within because I
hmm
feel like now the government has literally infiltrated these companies and they're becoming monopolies and like uh, absorbing each other and then it just becomes like what then the
Yeah.
government could just take them out and then absorb them and now it's literally you're buying from the state,
hmm
socialism 101. So
Yeah. That's what's
So,
there's a
happening.
problem.
That's what's kind of happening with the banking system, with all
Yeah,
these banks going out and then Chase acquiring them. It's like it's the centralization of the banking system so that it's easily more controllable, so that the government can eventually
be in
seize the
control.
means of finance. Like, it's
Hmm.
terrifying. I'm like,
Yeah. Well,
okay.
they're already implementing a financial. I think it's a. I want to say it's a payment system. It's called FedNow. I
Yeah.
don't know if you guys have heard of this, but
Yeah.
essentially they're gonna sometime in July they're gonna transfer everything to, or they're planning on transferring all of our U.S. dollars to CBDCs, which is centralized digital currency,
Mhm.
tied into the social credit score. So like if you post something that they don't like, they can turn off your money.
Right.
Mhm.
And they're also trying to track every single transaction through that so that they can make sure that they get their taxes. I
Yeah.
think it's
Right.
such a backward system. Sonny, you said something interesting. You were suggesting that someone was either shorting the stock or buying it really, really low so they can make money on the um, when it goes back up, because it's hard to say that Ford's going to fail. It's really hard to say that Budweiser's
Mhm.
going to fail, right? Is that what you were saying?
Kind of. I didn't really it wasn't like 100% fully thought out thought,
It makes
but
sense. It's a great
Listen,
thought.
listen, we're not the financial
listen.
people.
I did take AP macro in high school, so I know what they do. And I just watched supply side economics course on Hillsdale, and it was fantastic. I do have like a very low key fascination with economics, but I
Yeah.
know 20%. So,
Yes. Yes.
so
Well,
yes,
economists are wrong 50% of the time. So if
There you go.
except for
It
the
also
Laffer curve.
it also really fascinates me that so many economists are like lefties. It does
Mhm.
not make sense to me. I'm like, don't you understand? Like, socialism doesn't work at all, like at all.
Okay,
I just
there
don't
was
understand it.
such a good story about this. I don't know if you guys know what the Laffer curve is,
No,
but have you heard of it?
Nope.
no.
Okay. Oh, okay. So the Laffer
Teach us
curve
something.
is a curve that is like a graph, and it's named after Dr. Arthur Laffer. He was like, I did not come up with this curve, but I guess because he implemented it, and he was worked with Reagan, he worked with Ford, he worked with a lot of presidents, even like European, or not European, but foreign leaders as well. But long story short, he like coined the graph because it's basically a graph that goes like that. So
Oh,
it has taxes and revenue. So he basically is saying that, like, okay, like to a certain degree, like the higher you raise taxes, the higher the revenue goes. However, when you reach a certain point and taxes become so astronomically high, you actually start to lose revenue because your
mm-hmm.
tax base is going down because less
Right.
people are actually paying the amount that they're supposed to be paying.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's like a whole thing where it's like you can't increase revenue by increasing taxes because you decrease your tax base.
Right.
So he was like in a round table or like in some big panel. I think it was, oh gosh, I can't remember which presidency it was. I think it was Ford. Can't remember. But they had like a bunch of economists there, and they were like, gosh, I can't believe I can't remember the president. They were trying to do like a stimulus thing where we're like, okay, we're going to give $600 in a stimulus check. I was like, LOL, like COVID pandemic, like 1.0
Yeah.
pre. And so like 50 years ago. And he was like, everyone was like, yeah, this is going to be a great idea. It's going to stimulate the economy. Like, and so they get to him and he's like, okay, well, I just want to ask a really quick question. If all of these three economists are right and what they say is going to happen, that it's going to stimulate the economy, it's going to be great, why stop at 600? Why not give them $6,000? Why not give them
Mm-hmm.
$60,000? Why not give them $600,000? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
And they were stumped. Like, they were just like literally had no answer, because it's true. It's like no matter how much you give out from the government, and how much you get bring in, you're like lowering the tax base. So I just think it's so interesting because he's the only person who like really understands, and I highly recommend this if you're like interested in supply side economics and like understanding tax base, because also the trade and all of that stuff like comes into the market. And I'm rambling now, but it's just quite interesting, and I feel like he's the only economist who really understands like capitalism in its like at its heart, like really what it's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do and how it's supposed to function. And you just can't make more money on more taxes, because
No.
that's just not really how it works.
Right. That's
Sorry,
awesome.
that was like not fully thought out yet
No,
again, but
it's
that's what I
okay.
was
But that's what podcasts are for, right?
Yeah, thinking through things.
yeah,
I
yeah.
would also add that, like, in addition to that, there's just been so many different studies that basically prove once again that like economic independence among the citizenry actually creates the most economic growth and the more happiness among people, because they have the liberty to go and choose for themselves and provide for their family in the way that they choose, right? It's not, like the paternalistic, manner of these leftist governments that are imposing all these high taxes, um is very constraining to people after a period of time, and it under delivers, obviously, and then it leads to a lack of resources, a lack of innovation, incentives, etc., and then ultimately famine and death and just despair, right? Like that's just the history of the way that these big governments go. So anyway, yeah, I think we're all very much fans of limited government. But
Well,
this
what were
kind of
you
leads
saying?
me. What?
You were telling me about and how in Hungary, and I heard someone else talking about it.
Oh yeah,
Um they
the
lower the tax rate for women by 1% for each child you have. I think it starts the they have a flat tax for
no,
income at
it's not even
16%.
1%.
Well,
It's
if you
not
have up
even
to
one.
4 children, then they eliminate it entirely.
Yeah,
But
so
it's like
if
if
you
you have 1, then it's 15, and then if you have 2, it's 14, like that, I think.
no, so if you there's like two different things. Like for the student loans, if a woman has two children, her student loans are cut in half, and then if she has three children, like the student loans are totally taken away. And then if a couple is married and then they have one child, so okay, wait, sorry, when a couple gets married and they want to get a housing loan for like $30,000, the government will give them that, and then to buy a house. And then if they have a child, the loan basically, like, they don't have to pay interest on it. And then if they have up to 3 children, like the entire loan just gets like wiped out.
See you later.
Like it's crazy. And
Like,
I
what's even the point at that point?
I was kind of considering that, like, how is that any different than like a leftist government doing it? Because this Hungarian woman is conservative. And so I'm like, that's kind of like not a conservative thing to really do. But the
In
whole thing is
almost.
like to incentivize having children, like to make more Hungarian babies. And I
Yeah,
like I like that
He's like,
notion.
"I don't know how I
Gentry's
feel about
face is
this."
like, yeah. I'm like, how is this going to be sustainable? But it's very intriguing. What do you think, Gentry?
I whenever I hear government funds, I just think that, oh, that's money that we all paid into,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
right? And so in theory, it's probably a really good start,
Mhm.
right? But kind of like what you were saying with the Lafferty curve, like why not stop at 30,000? Why not just give
Mhm.
them like 3 million or 300 million or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Just lower taxes. I mean,
Mhm.
kids are expensive, right? I think in Washington State, it's like a quarter million until they're 18, right, per
Mhm.
kid.
Yeah.
And you could just have more kids. You could afford to have more kids if you just lowered taxes
Mhm.
Yeah.
to
You
stimulate
know,
growth.
That's how
yeah,
I feel
right
about
as
the
you said that,
reparation.
I remembered one of the policies is that when a woman has a child, her income tax gets
Goes away.
deducted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
that's
like,
what I was
See,
talking
that's
about.
good.
That's
yeah,
what I
That's
was talking
amazing.
about.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
if you have like 3 kids, though, you don't pay any income tax for
I think
life.
it's 4. It's 4.
Oh, okay, four
Yeah.
kids, four
Yeah.
kids, no income tax for life. I'm like, sign me up.
For the woman, I think it's just for the woman though. Like they don't they you could
Yeah,
they could still yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
But
the
that's how I feel
husband,
about the reparations. I'm like, well, why not give them 200 million? Why about
oh my
$2 billion
gosh,
person? Whatever. Like, are we even? Is there even a brain in your head? Like, I'm just so confused. But whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
But this kind of moves on to like the next topic that Gentry wanted to touch
yeah.
on. It's like the limited government, providing for yourself, and really
Mhm.
like what are ways that we can be, mindful of liberty and freedom outside of social media. So, what are your thoughts on that? Or is that even the
I
point? Is
Yeah,
that what?
so
Yeah.
this might be controversial
Okay.
because we all kind of further this in a little bit, but um, I want to preface this by saying I think it's good to pay attention to what's going on in the news, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really good to be informed, but I think in a lot of ways we're getting distracted by trying to not be distracted, right?
Mm.
Because there's a huge like thought process in the conservative social media movements, like don't be distracted, right? Like follow the news, like follow this
Oh my
reporter,
god.
follow this story, all this kind of stuff. And
Nonstop, nonstop.
the
Mhm.
I think though, because we're getting so engrossed in following the news and trying to find the right story, that we're missing what's right in front of us.
Mm.
Like we're missing time with friends, family, community, like actually getting involved in a church, actually getting involved in like local politics, getting involved in community events, being excellent at your job or your business,
Mhm.
right? Because I see it all the time. Like I post a couple times a day, and I get a whole bunch of likes from the same people. It's awesome. I
Mhm.
love it, but I'm also like, there's this dichotomy, right? Like obviously I'm feeding into it, so I'm not necessarily, it's like I'm part of the problem in a way, but I'm also not part of the problem, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like we're getting distracted by trying to not be distracted.
Yeah.
And
I feel you
yeah,
on that.
I would agree with
Like,
that.
the whole, like, "It's a distraction," or, like, "Don't be distracted." Um, Sorry to kinda, like, butt in, but
go for it. It's your
I
podcast.
no, yeah, I resonate with that so much, and Um, I've always been like a proponent of being, in the moment and focusing on, what's in front of you. But I work in social media. And so a lot of my job is to, find that story or, do that research. And while it is my job and I feel actually so blessed to be in the position that I am, some days I'm just like, I could care less what
Yeah.
happens in the news today, but not always, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. It's just really paying attention to how you can improve just the smallest details in your life and actually
Hmm.
enjoying life. Like
Yeah.
enjoy the little things and there's like a saying, it's like romanticize your life. Like just make the most out of every little opportunity and be grateful because not everyone has the health that I have. Not everyone
Mhm.
has, not saying that I have like a ton of money, but not everyone has the money that I have. And so I'm just like everything that I do and say and that I'm around, I want to be so mindful that like God has given me all of this. And
Mhm.
it actually comes down to like the biblical value of being a steward of what God's
Yeah.
blessed you with. And so nothing in my life is actually mine, it's all God's. God has been so gracious and has blessed me in abundance. And so I, you know, kind of lose focus of that from time to time. And it's always great to recenter my thoughts and heart and just make sure that I'm in the right spot mentally. So that's my 2 cents.
That's a great 2 cents.
Yeah. What about you, Sunny?
Couldn't agree more. I think it's dawned on me in the past year or so, especially because a lot of people have told me your whole identity is politics. And
Oh,
I
so
take
Same.
that as a
sad.
compliment. Not offended at all. And also because I just feel like I don't see it as politics anymore because, we are distracted, for lack of a better word, by the illusion of choice.
Mm,
And I really feel that people like us who understand the depth and the gravity of what's going on, they're really, that doesn't, like, the system that we have in front of us is not real.
mhm.
And so you have to kind of look beyond that and see what are the deeper issues. And, it's really good versus evil. And I found myself realizing, like, wow, I want to be fully on God's team. I want to be fully immersed in what God has given us. This world is so beautiful and I forget that so many times because I'm just, we do get bogged down by the reality of the world that we live in, and sometimes I'm like, I didn't sign up for this ride. Like, what happened here? But
Mhm.
I think it's a lesson, and you can't have good without evil. You can't have light without dark, right? So it just,
Yeah.
in the past year, as as Allie knows, I've just, like, my journey, like, with reading the Bible, like, something that I never did. It's like something I'm just so grateful that I've gone through the things that I've gone through because it's brought me to this place. And now I'm like, oh, I'm fully, like, 100% in on promoting what my values, not even promoting, but just being convicted with what my values are. Like, this is important to me. I don't really care that it is considered or viewed as, oh, your identity is politics. It's like, no, that's freedom. Like, my identity is freedom, like fighting for the
Mhm.
things that actually matter to me, matter to our world, matter to God. That's what's important to me. So I
Mhm.
am just so grateful as well to be like around people and like interact with people that have those same values, because I just feel like we're on God's team, and it is important. It's important to be steward of his word. And
Mhm.
it is all to glorify God. Like, truly, I feel like I've had a couple of crazy moments recently where I was like, whoa, like this is literally the answer. Like, we are literally here. Everyone's trying to figure out a purpose. I feel like I talk about that a lot because it's something that
Mhm.
I've thought about a lot. And it's just like, well, I don't know. You like, that's within you. It's literally within us. So
Mhm.
God is within us. So
Amen. Yeah.
amen.
When you were saying the story of, being a light on the hill, like we are the light, we like what we have inside our hearts, which is Jesus, is the answer to so much and all of the pain and anguish and uncertainty in this world. It all comes down to who Jesus was and what he did for us. And, when we realized that we were destined for the fiery pit of hell, um, because of the fall of man, and that we realize that Jesus really did come and, in all his deity and all his humanness, he came, lived a perfect life, and died on the cross for our
To
sins as the
overcome.
perfect sacrifice and the perfect lamb. And when we can accept that, and we can accept God's love, then we have that in our hearts, and that becomes the answer
Yeah.
to other people's pain and anguish and uncertainty that we once were in and dealing with, that we thought we could overcome ourselves. And ultimately,
Yeah.
we learned that we cannot. So,
I also
yeah.
will say that I think it's one of the most important factors of this too, is that it's like it takes choice, because we all have free will, and it
Mhm.
takes choice to like really choose that lifestyle and choose what the answer is, like you can deny that and ignore it for as long as you want, but it doesn't deny reality. It doesn't make it not true. So I
Mhm.
think that's so important. I think that's like something that we learn from God, from Jesus, and it's like it's just wild. It really is when you think
Mhm.
it's like this
Mhm.
like juxtaposition. So I feel like it's important to note that all it takes is one simple choice, and it's really just like letting go of your ego.
Mhm. Absolutely. Any
Like that.
closing remarks, Gentry?
Um, I love the tangent that you guys just went on, because Jesus is the answer, right?
Mhm.
Um, like the golden rule, right, is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then
Mhm.
love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I feel like
Mm.
the deconstructionists or the left will look at and say, "Oh, well, you're supposed to love your neighbor," right? But they miss that last part: love your neighbor as you love yourself. And
Mm.
the way that I think about it is, you can't really love yourself in like a godly way if you don't necessarily know who you are. You don't really
Mhm.
know who you are without Jesus, right? Because he's really like the big identity piece that a lot of this world is missing,
Mhm.
right? Because we're all kind of operating out of hurt or shame or guilt or whatever it is. I mean, if you want to boil everything down to its simplest form, right, it's that phrase, hurt people. And so
Absolutely.
I feel like if we could, I mean, I try to push people to go to church all the time, because I can I can probably preach, right? I'd love to be a pastor someday, but I feel like there's something amazing about understanding who you are in Christ, so that you can actually love yourself as
Mm.
Christ sees you, as God
Mm.
sees you, as like a child of God, right?
Mhm.
And then you're going to be able to love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? So you're going to be able to
Mhm.
see him in new light. And loving your neighbor, I don't think necessarily means to be accepting of your neighbor,
No.
right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to love people
Okay.
enough to like be around them, to bring them in, but we're supposed to also love people enough to not leave them where they're at.
Yeah,
That'd be my closing thoughts.
in their sin, Jesus called
Yeah.
them to a transformation of life, not to just validate everything that they're feeling.
Hmm.
Well, thank you. I mean, this conversation was packed,
I
and
know, I got chills.
I know this. I'm just like,
So
oh, warm,
good.
fuzzy feelings. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Gentry. This was
Yeah.
amazing, and yeah, just
Yeah.
have a great rest of your day, I guess.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Well,
this was
thanks.
awesome.
Yeah, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. That was by far one of my favorites, so thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah,
Oh,
we are
good. I'm
so
glad that I'm one of the
excited.
favorites. I always try to be the best.
That's awesome.
Competitions, but we like.
Thank you, Allie and Sunny, for having me on. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, take
All
care.
right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.